Okay, I'm going to make a video about Lisa Lam and Hotel Cecil. Initially, I was not planning on making a video about the Netflix series. It's a 4-part documentary. I think they call it a docu-series. It was 4 parts, and I believe the actors assumed they did a great job. And I didn't feel like they adequately covered it. I didn't agree with their assessment. But it wasn't until I went back and I watched the 2005 US version of Dark Water, and then I watched the behind-the-scenes making of, and I found out it has ties to Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, which was sort of foreshadowing Sharon Tate's death and the death of their son. After realizing that there was more information to cover, I started looking into it, and I figured out that there's actually a chain of Cecil hotels. And the original hotel was in London with the Cecil family. They have ties back to Queen Elizabeth I, going back to 1600s, because they were nobility. And so there's other hotels that they were affiliated with or that were modeled after their hotel, and they all have ties, they're all connected to Aleister Crowley and Luciferianism or Satanism. Now, in Ghost Adventures, which is available for free if you want to do a weekly free trial on Discovery Plus, then you can go back and watch the Ghost Adventures Cecil Hotel episode. Let's see. So spoiler alert, I'm talking about both these TV shows, and trigger warning, I'm also going to be talking about mental health issues and self-harm. All right, so here's all the information I found, and I just kept finding more and more information. Like, this rabbit hole just kept going, and I'm still finding information about them, information that wasn't covered by a lot of people on YouTube, and information, some things that I wasn't seeing on Reddit and wasn't covering on any of these sources. And so there was a lot more to it, and that's why I'm doing the first 3 parts are devoted to this topic, and the first part is going to be an introduction and about the hotels and the elevator game. Let's see. All right, so the original Cecil Hotel was this very large, luxurious palace in London, and it was with the Cecil family, and it had a Masonic lodge, and it was named after this, British nobility. They had ties. There was in 1890. They had ties to Luciferianism and Aleister Crowley, aka 666, the Mark of the Beast. I think the most dangerous man in the world. He stayed there. And he is a precursor to Anton LaVey's Church of Satan in 1966. L. Ron Hubbard was one of his disciples, and then he came back and started his own thing, the Church of Scientology, that was based on kind of a splintering decision with him. But Aleister Crowley's teachings, he combines a lot of pagan, and it's not that they worship the devil, it's that they believe in this Gnosticism. Luciferians, there's a reason why the Apple logo on your iPhone products, it's an apple with the missing bite out of the apple, in reference to Lucifer offering knowledge, to take from the tree of knowledge to Eve. So they are seeking knowledge. And so what are these? So it's all complicated and it all overlaps. I'm going to start going on these rabbit holes. So what they're wanting to do is access off-world they want to communicate and channel or conjure these interdimensional, off-world aliens. Maybe they could use the word aliens, but they're demons. That's what they are. And they want to access some of the sacred knowledge from them. And then in order to have control over others, they hold on to that and they hold it over people's heads. And they work several decades, if not 100 years in advance. And so a lot of the times you'll have someone who, it could be Stephen King, who says that he doesn't remember. Stephen King says he does not remember writing books in the 80s. He couldn't tell you about the books. All he remembers doing is taking LSD and cocaine, I was to say that probably, and then channeling demons who auto-wrote his best novels. Steve Jobs, everybody in Silicon Valley, they're going out to the desert. And they're going to take hallucinogenics, DMT, ayahuasca, mushrooms, peyote. They're going to do these types of hallucinogenics, and then they're going to channel or conjure, and then they'll do auto writing while this demon, works through them and writes, whatever is necessary for their, as far as whatever their aim is, as far as technology or creative writing or Led Zeppelin, now, Aleister Crowley, he was going to Egypt, he went, to Europe, and a lot of the knowledge, I just saw a thing over the Vatican, and the theory is that the famous library in Alexandria in Egypt that contained all of the world's knowledge from all of these ancient texts, because there was, the Mesopotamians and then the ancient Greeks and Romans and Chinese civilizations. They had all of that knowledge, and supposedly the Vatican, they burned down that library, but only after they raided it and took, warehouses of information, and that people will pay, wealthy elite will pay 6 figures for one page from the Vatican archives, under their underground archives that goes on for miles and miles. So, knowledge is power. But that's why these Luciferians, that's what they're tapping into. They're tapping into that knowledge. And that's what Aleister Crowley and these wealthy elite families were doing. The Cecil family dates back to Queen Elizabeth I, we're talking about 1600s. They were nobility. I'm sure they had lots of eyes wide shut mansion parties. They were located there near the Thames River. Since demolished. Sounds okay. Now, supposedly, I can't finding things about these hotels. Aleister Crowley stayed there, and he conjured up a spirit called Lam, Lam, which is a very common Chinese surname. And the Lam, he said, were the gray alien beings. And so, I don't believe in aliens, but I do believe in interdimensional celestial beings and demonic beings. So he also wrote a poem that said something about sacrifice, and that was the connection to that hotel. Now, in response to the boom in Los Angeles, the Cecil family created a second hotel. And I don't know, I've heard different stories that it was built to be this luxury hotel in Art Deco style. It's supposed to be this really nice hotel. Someone else tried to say that it was just supposed to be like for a middle-class family. But it was because everybody was coming to California, so they had 3 hotelers, because 3 and 13 and 33 are significant numbers to Freemasons. So in 1924, they started, and by 1927, it opened. And it's basically shaped like an E, or the tip of a trident. So there's 3 parts to it, as you saw on the roof. It's raised this very grand style for $1 million, which was a lot of money back then. And I really didn't find anything on the names particularly, so we can skip that. But then I found out, in addition to the original Cecil Hotel in London and the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, there were a few other Cecil hotels. And so I looked into it, and we have, there was 2 famous Cecils, and that is the Baron William Cecil and the Lord Cecil. This dates back to like Queen Elizabeth, 1600s. Now, then they also had their American cousins. And so those are the Amherst and the Vanderbilts. And of course, the Vanderbilts, they made their money on railroads and steamboats as far as tycoon barons. And so they also, the Vanderbilts, also have a very famous hotel that's now a museum, and it's called the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. And I wanted to talk about that because I know that hotel, and I've seen pictures of that hotel. So I've seen that drained swimming pool with the ropes that look like nooses. So I've seen that, and I've seen the artwork that Tony Podesta has in his possession. I think it's Tony, not John. And then I saw that same drained pool pop up on American Horror Story Season 5 Hotel at a hotel similar to Hotel Cortez. I mean, it's called Hotel Cortez, but it was supposed to be Hotel Cecil. So I've seen that pool. And then I was in the photos, and that are the artwork, because it's all, artwork. And so, and I guess if you call it artwork, you can get away with it. But they're basically trying to hide in plain sight and in plain sight. So that artwork depicts little children being tied up in red shoes like similar to Dorothy's red, ruby red slippers. And I was like, well, if I'm going to talk about the Podestas who worked for Bill and Hillary Clinton, then I'm definitely going to have to talk about the Republicans. I'm going to talk about the Democrats. It's only fair. So Tony Podesta and John Podesta are these campaign strategists. They are consultants. They are lobbyists. They both worked, I think, for Bill. Tony worked for Bill. John Podesta was Hillary's head of her campaign, and he has that painting of these abused children. So that's the Biltmore Estate. Then I found out that the Vanderbilt family, there's another chain of hotels. There's about 20 of them. That's the Bowman and Biltmore. So I was wondering if that was connected. Now, Anderson Cooper is a descendant, of course, of the Vanderbilts. His mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, and so that's one of a very recognizable name. And I remember that Anderson was a male model, even though his family is very wealthy. His mother had lots of money. He was the youngest of 4 sons. He was having to work as a male model between the ages of 10 and 13. And then in 2014, he told Howard Stern during an interview that he was approached when he was 13 by a male photographer who offered him money. And that's when he decided to leave the modeling world. That was the only time that it happened, because he was there alone without an adult. And yeah, see, that's what happened. And this is why Hollywood makes movies. This is why Netflix makes movies. It's because they're trying to get ahead of something. They're trying to defend themselves and to kind of put out their own narrative or counter narrative. But I don't really believe that. I think that was the whole point, that his mother is part of that's, because that's how these elite families operate. They're not like, normal families. They're not like rich families. These very elite families that go back to, centuries, to royal families with bloodlines. This is how they operate. Now, she has 4 sons, and one of them does not talk to her from a previous marriage. The other sometimes talks to her, and the third son, Anderson's full brother, not a half brother, he took his own life at 23, and he jumped from his mother's apartment balcony while she watched. And I don't know if that's if you really jumped, or if there's like foul play. And I thought, well, considering that we're talking about this hotel and people taking their own life by jumping, I found that interesting. But I said if I would talk about the Clintons and Democrats, I should tell you about Republicans. I want you to think that they are the only people who hurt children, because basically, and if you read David McGowan's book, Serial Killers, the politics, Programmed to Kill, the politics of serial killers, it explains how 1/3 of that book, which is available online, I guess I could put a link to it. It explains how there are secret societies, and you have to do certain things to be initiated into that secret society. And you can't blow the whistle, and you can't go to the cops. No matter what happens, you can't talk about it, because if you do, then they have, then they will expose you as well. So if everybody's dirty, then everybody is compromised. Nobody's going to go to the cops. And this was true of a Republican named Dennis Hastert. He was a Republican Speaker of the House. He served between Newt Gingrich and Nancy Pelosi. From 1987 to 2007, he was a senator. He represented Illinois. And so this also ties into the 1980s. The 1980s is like during Satanic Panic, which is a term coined by the CIA, because independently throughout the United States, children were coming home to parents from daycares, and they were telling them these wild tales of animal sacrifice, and they appeared to be abused, if you know what I'm referring to, that needed medical attention. And then there were other things that also appeared to be human or animal sacrifice and part of some kind of ritual. And it was SRA, SEX, ritual abuse. So the CIA coined the term Satanic Panic, that all these things that were happening to these kids, and all the kids throughout the entire United States in the 80s, early 90s, they were all coming home, and they were all telling the same story about robes and black masses and black Sabbaths. And this was before the internet, so I don't know how all of these children had the same account of the same events that are going on locally for them. And it's also tied into Colonel Michael Aquino, who started the NSA, formerly the CIA. He was a Satanist, and he started his own cult, and he was abusing children on the military base. So he had access to other military personnel's kids. But he was too big to jail. So at the time, the Attorney General was Rudolph Giuliani. He chose not to prosecute him. Not because he wasn't guilty, it's because too many people were guilty. And there's just too many. There's certain people that are too big to jail, and they're never going to go down. You might get some procurers and some recruiters, but you're not going to get people. That's what people don't understand about Jeffrey Epstein. He was working for the Israeli intelligence agency, him and Ghislaine Maxwell and Maxwell's father. They were setting people up. That was a honeypot. They were blackmailing them. They got them on tape. They got Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew on tape doing these things. And then they they were compromised, and so they had to cooperate with the Israeli intelligence or risk these videotapes being leaked. And some of that was some pretty sick stuff that involved cannibalism. So, but that was in the 1980s. There was the Reagan-Bush administration, the Franklin Credit Union savings and loan scandal, Lawrence King, not Larry King, the journalist, but Lawrence King, and that was all in Nebraska, where Boys Town was. And MK Ultra takes place, it started on the military bases, and then it moved to the hospitals, where Joseph Mengele, under Operation Paperclip, we brought in these Nazi doctors and scientists, and that's how we got our space program. That's also how we got psychological warfare and DARPA and our CIA. This is when Joseph Mengele is working in these California insane asylums, which is in American Horror Story season 2. You see that, and it's true. Joseph Mengele did not have. He was so vain. He thought he was such a pretty boy. The angel of death, of Auschwitz in Poland. He was supposed to, like all the other Nazis, have his blood type tattooed on his arm, but he somehow got around it and never got it done. And he was able to escape through a rat line and fled to the United States, where he was given a new identity. And some people think that he continued, that he was a serial killer and possibly responsible for the Zodiac killings. He was also possibly doing twin studies in South America, as well as heading up the mind control, psychological warfare monarch, and doing that, which I talked about in the Free Britney video. And so he's working in these asylums, and then we see the MK Ultra studies being moved to communes or cults like Church of Satan. And I think it would be easier to do if you focus on a homeless population, because as I said in the Free Britney video, what happened was that they deinstitutionalized their asylums. And so instead of people who were slow or with intellectual disabilities or had mental health issues, instead of having them in these hospitals for an indefinite amount of time, and despite not having social or any type of skills, they could, despite not being able to take care of themselves or work, they were put out on the streets. And that's when non-government nonprofits came in and picked them up, and they started. And that was Jim Jones in Cults, which is also covered in American Horror Stories, Cults. So about the connection between the homeless population, MK Ultra, and serial killers. And so it's somehow all very, and I guess incestuous, it's all connected, and because it's all kind of running the same playbook, same script. So you see that. That's also going on with the Clintons, with the Democratic Party, but it also went on during the Reagan-Bush administration. And I saw a video, because I love I'm probably the only person that loves clickbait, but I saw a video, and it was like weird first ladies, like that Nancy Reagan was obsessed with horoscopes and astrology, and she even planned her husband, Ronald Reagan, planned his travel and trips around his horoscopes, and I would imagine that And people thought that was really strange, but I think what she was doing is 69 days into Reagan's presidency, his VP, who he didn't want, he was forced to take a brokered convention, was forced to take George Bush, the former head of CIA, but once you're CIA, you're always CIA. So he's forced to take Bush as a VP. And 69 days into his presidency, Bush's friend's adopted son shot him. So, yeah, I guess maybe there was a reason why Nancy Reagan was very protective, and he didn't want him traveling on any kind of satanic holidays or anything that would be ritual. Because the Hinckley family are here locally. They're a very prominent Dallas oil tycoon family, and they have this adopted son, and he probably was very much MK Ultra'd to attempt to assassinate President Reagan and have that creepy Bush come in. And of course, they're directly tied to Nazis. Either they were funding the Nazis and they may have actually been Nazis, because maybe that's not really their last name. They also have ties to Aleister Crowley. So the whole family is just absolutely disgusting. And the Clintons worked for them, and the Obamas worked for them. Because, I mean, it's fake. It's a show. It's a big show for you. I want to talk about that. And there was institutions like Boys Town. So there's MK Ultra, and it's going on in prisons and military prisons. And it's going on it also went out in Boys Town. There's Charles Manson, Roman Polanski. That was probably where Charles Manson was MK Ultra'd, and he graduated from being an MK Ultra victim to a handler, but there was somebody over him because he was a pimp, he was a recruiter, he was programming other women or other people in his cult. But there's people he was working for, and one of the persons he was working for was Roman Polanski because he wanted that child as a human sacrifice, his firstborn son. And Sharon Tate wanted out, and she'd already agreed, and she wanted to betray her covenant. She wanted out for the sake of her child, and so it's all connected. But they're also doing MK Ultra at Boys Town, and this is in Nebraska, and the current head of Church of Satan is more like they're not really in favor, and they're not really getting the funding that they used to get from the CIA because they were funded by the CIA, and now it's called the Temple of Satan, which is by this guy, Lucian Graves. And whatever they did to him, Colonel Michael Aquino, supposedly, he was the one that broke him and programmed him. And his left eye is, whatever they did was so it caused so much brain damage that it affected his left eye. They took his left eye. But another person who is tied to American Horror Story, who's also tied to Nebraska, was a failed child actress turned pop star, Lady Gaga, because she sings about the man that she's in love with from Nebraska in the song You and I. And because this woman, I don't know, she claims that Lady Gaga is a Christian because she wears a cross, that she's a good Catholic. She's a Luciferian high priestess directly under Marina Abramovich. She's, she's gotten in trouble and she's been sued by her assistants because she has to require people to watch her sleep in case she starts becoming demonically possessed, because she's very afraid of her own safety. She's also gotten into trouble for leaving a hot tub full of blood. I guess it was animal blood, but she's bathed in blood because vampire facials are great for your skin. Blood is the key to staying young. Blood facials, drinking blood, consuming blood. But I'm not afraid of her. Her big conspiracy theory is people think she killed her friend and the woman she was working for. She signed with the same label as Lena Morgana, and supposedly Morgana died from falling or jumping off the Staten Island Hotel, and so we have another jumper. So Cecil Hotel, Anderson Cooper's brother Carter, and now Lena Morgana. So he was also a jumper. There's a couple of different reports on this. They were scouted by the same agent, and she was the backup singer, and she was going to be featured on one of her songs. And then she stole her look and stole her whole act. And so there's one report that she did it, and that there was a male accomplice that helped her cover it up, and it was part of a ritualistic sacrifice to help her level up. And the other example was that she was in Los Angeles, and she wasn't anywhere in the state of New York when this happened at the Staten Island Hotel. But you know what? Roman Polanski was in Europe when Sharon Tate died, and Courtney Love was in Los Angeles when Kurt Cobain died. So you can be somewhere else and be the benefit of a ritualistic suicide or ritualistic death. And supposedly that's why she calls her followers monsters, is because she is dealing with the death of Lena Morgana. When she does the video Paparazzi, it references Morgana. Now, you and I about the Nebraska connection, it's about a baby doll or pretty baby, which is like the reference to Brooke Shields being auctioned off by her mother, who's also a prostitute. They live at a brothel in New Orleans. And so typically with sugar daddies and your handler daddy, you're known as a baby doll or a pretty baby. So in the video, you see this like toothless, creepy guy in an ice cream truck, and there's torture, there's abuse. You see Lady Gaga at a crossroads. And she's wearing a white virginal dress because this is her first time. And this is her groomer, and she goes through a transformation. She goes through like a transformation or experimentation, but it's Stockholm syndrome or it's trauma bonding, because like Drew Barrymore loves Steven Spielberg. That's her dad. That is her godfather. She loves him. Heather O'Rourke, not so much. And that's why she's on here. And I'm going to talk about that one in the Free Britney one. So in Paparazzi, Lady Gaga's lover throws her off the balcony. So another reference to being thrown off a balcony. There's white and black circles, which is part of the MK Ultra, the spiral circles, in order to trigger an MK Ultra alter. There's leopard print, which is about beta sex kitten programming. The all-seeing eye, 666. The 3 sixes held up over the eye. There's lightning. The lightning bolts. Her earrings, that symbolizes the Lucifer's fall from that symbolizes Lucifer's fall from heaven as a renegade angel cast out of heaven. The left eye covered, the bunny ears, MK Ultra. And so you see in that video, paparazzi, that Stephanie Dramata is dead, and that she's reborn as Lady Gaga, and she reemerges as this new person and assumes an altar. So that is her MK Ultra altar. There's devil horns and Disney ears, and then she even admits to killing her boyfriend. Even though she admits to killing her boyfriend, that only boosts her career, and everybody loves her for it because she's now famous, and being famous is much better than being a famous murderer. It's much better than being a nobody. And then also, Lady Gaga is on season 5, American Horror Story, as a vampire who drinks blood and bathes in it. And she also keeps children down in that empty pool, just like in the Biltmore Hotel, and just like in the John Podesta artwork, and just like we see with the satanic artwork of Marina Abramovich. But there's also worldwide. There's Cecil hotels. There's one in Alexandria, Egypt, by a French Jewish family, Metzer, and it was meant to be a romantic hotel near Cleopatra's Needles. They said they named it the Cecil Hotel Cecil Steinberg, because they wanted it modeled after the London Cecil, the Cecil Hotel in London, because they considered that was the biggest hotel in all of Europe. It was this luxurious palace, and it had a Masonic lodge for people like Aleister Crowley to get together. And it was in direct, and this one is, it's called Cleopatra's Needles, but Cleopatra did not have needles. What it is an obelisk. And it basically is that phallic statue. We have one in Washington, D.C. There's one in Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas, where they shot Kennedy. Great stretch. So that phallic-shaped building was re-erected also in New York and London, and it's named after the original, it's the myth of the Osiris, and the husband of Isis and brother. They were like, so in order to maintain a royal bloodline, Isis and Osiris were married, and brother and sister. And so the others, they were murdered by the brother. So the other brothers murdered Osiris, dismembered him, chopped him up into 14 pieces, scattered them throughout the kingdom. His wife and sister Osiris, she found all of the pieces and reclaimed them, except one piece there was one piece of him she couldn't find, and that was her favorite piece, because it was supposed to be his penis, but the penis was fed to a fish, which is a weird story. So now we have all of these phallic obelisks. We have them. We have one in Dallas. We have, Washington, D.C. They're there. Also, they put a reflection pool, because as above, so below. So it's a reflection pool bouncing off of the obelisk. And then I remember seeing John Podesta, while he was working on Hillary Clinton's campaign. He had a photo of his hand, and it had 14 and a fish, or 13 parts that were found, and the one that was eaten by the fish. And nobody could figure that out for the longest time, that it was in reference to Osiris and Isis. But Crowley took all of that information that was available by the Egyptians, and that knowledge combined with all of Europe's, and tied to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That one was in Egypt. There's also one in India, and one in North Ipswich, Queensland, and Australia. Both of those are, former colonies under the British Empire. So there could be a connection. I didn't see them. Then I found out that right before I went on that the Vanderbilt built more in combination with Bowman, that there's another 20 hotels. So there might be a niche of Masonic hotels with connections to Luciferians and the occult. Now this is like normal what goes on in their hotels. I did come across YouTube because I was researching this. They recommended a video. It was by a psychic who described about the hotel being built in Los Angeles, and they said that it was always meant to be transitory. Even though it was built right before the stock market crash and around the Great Depression in the 30s, and then in the 40s, we were at war, but there was, so during those lean years, it was always meant to be like that, and it was in that it's meant to be singular, and it's this vortex, a portal, and when you walk into, we kind of see this with American Horror Story, because I went back and I watched all of American Horror Stories, starting with season 5, Hotel. And so when you walk in, your experience is not like everybody else's experience. And that is how, like, spiritually or whatever, that is the nature of that hotel, that you're seeing things and hearing things that the person next to you isn't hearing or seeing. They're not being affected spiritually. They're not being affected the way you're being affected. And I thought that was really interesting. Also, the hotel is on a ley line from San Diego, and Lisa Lam, she started her trip. She went by train, which I don't know if they make that clear that she was traveling by train. She went now from British Columbia to San Diego. She was there first. And then, now that's a ley line, and it maps, it's like a kind of a mega, I don't know what the term would be, but it has, it's like this nucleus, and it just spreads out all of these other ley lines. And I think it may, at some point, depending on the shift of the Earth, you'll have a 33-degree parallel line that goes near Atlanta, Georgia, which is Black Hollywood. It's also where the CDC is. It's also where those Georgia Guidestones, the Freemason Stonehenge is. It talks about population. Yeah, they have a monument that talks about depopulating the world near the Center for Central Disease. Then you move that down through Dallas, because Dallas was the first Masonic city in Texas, and that's where they shot JFK. And the point blank is where they shot him. It all lines up, because the person in Dealey Plaza, he was Freemason. And then that moves to California. There's fault lines, and then there's this magnetic energy. And I think it took people a long time. And I don't know, I used to watch the History Channel. I have a BA and an MA in history, and I taught history for 10 years. And I used to watch the History Channel since I'm disabled and on bed rest. But after a few months, like, I figured all that stuff out. It's the way the pyramids, because there are pyramids and monuments like that throughout the world, and it's followed by magnetic energy. That's how you can build such a huge, grand structure, by pulling on magnetic energy. So they were able to harness that. Hold on. Oh, okay, and there's one more. So there's also a Cecil Hotel, and it's in Harlem. and it was the Cecil Hotel and Minton's Playhouse. It was a jazz club, and I guess it's like rock and roll. The rock and roll was devil's music. Well, before rock and roll, it was jazz. That was the devil's music, and jazz came out of the New Orleans. But according to this article I read, people funded, like white people, wealthy white people, they funded the Harlem Renaissance and that whole warring 20s, the warring 1920s, and that whole Great Gatsby, flapper girl kind of era. And of course, that was the first time that women, that was the first sexual revolution. People talk about the 60s, that was the second sexual revolution for women. It was the 1920s is when women cut their hair short, started smoking cigarettes because they were told to by an advertiser. That was a marketing campaign. They got duped. They started wearing those little flapper dresses, and so the wealthy white elite were funding that, and it was for mind control. It was a form of mind control. They created this artistic and cultural and intellectual community that tied into to Aleister Crowley and his theosophical Gnosticism and Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is what he was doing in London and what he was doing in New York. And it's supposed to attract wealthy Americans in spite of our Puritan and evangelism. And so Europeans, because Europeans had tied politics to the Holy Roman Empire and the Vatican, Europeans kind of, once they were done with that, they were done. So they never had like a revival of evangelism or a Christian revival of any kind. But the Puritans being here and all of those who came over were part of that. And so they wanted to have something that would bring people together and away from the church. And I think that was the whole purpose, and that was the point of this article. And if you look at, you see this in Great Gatsby, they did the remake. You see in Some Like It Hot. There was, so Marilyn Monroe was telling Tony Curtis that that she loves jazz, she likes it hot. So, it's supposed to be said during that warring 20s, 30s, 1920s, 1930s period. We see it in Chicago, Roxy Hart, in Vera, the Bling Jazz. They say jazz made me do it, that because of jazz, they were forced to turn to a life of sin and alcohol and maybe smoke reefer cigarettes and go out every night and dance instead of staying home and being good wives. And then I found out there's two more in India and Queensland, as well as another chain, but that's in relation to the Vanderbilts. So, all right, the next thing I'm going to look at is Skid Row and about the homeless population. So you have this Art Deco building, cost $1 million, opened in 1929. I think it started in 1924, opened in 1929. So it coincided with the stock market crash. And so it became, for 100 years, it's been providing short-term, long-term housing. So you have international travelers and you have out-of-state travelers, and they are booking this hotel or booking stay on Main, and they don't realize that they're going to be vacationing in Tent City. Oh, sorry. Hey, Otis. That's the cat. So they're making these international travels. They're not familiar with LA and the downtown area. So they don't realize they're booking a vacation at Tent City on Skid Row until they get there and that it's too late as far as making accommodations, or it's difficult, for them to change their accommodations. So at this point, it was, when Lisa Lam was there, it's a youth hostel. She's staying with other girls. It's for, budget accommodations for tourists, and then it's also short-term, long-term housing for the homeless. And so it would be something similar to, but probably a little more flexibility than Section 8. And I like a historian. So they brought in, Netflix has an historian, Dr. Doug Mungan Sr. He said that that this is the most dangerous and violent place in the United States, Tent City on Skid Row in downtown LA. It's 56 blocks, the poorest area of the world, according to him. 100 years. This has been going on in as far as the homeless population in that area. All of the homeless assistance is in one area. So if you're seeking assistance, you're pretty much limited to that area. When people are released from institutions like jails, prison, mental health wards, psychiatric hospitals, the police take them there and dump them out. In the 1970s, as I said in the Free Britney video, there was a policy of containment, that's discussed in Netflix. So it was very much like not in my backyard. Yes, I know there's a homeless population, but I'm a taxpayer and I don't want property values going down. So I don't want to have a tent city outside on my beach front property. So they're able to contain it to this one area, and that area is now 56 blocks. And of course, I talked about in the Free Britney video the connection between MK Ultra, asylums, the homeless population. And I would think it would be easier to run medical and psychological experiments on random homeless people that you pick up versus actually being in the psych wards, because there's not going to be any witnesses. If something happens, there are certain people that you could get away with murder. There's certain people that nobody's going to miss, and nobody's going to ask any questions. And if they do ask questions, they're probably going to say they deserved it. And that's the truth. That there are. So I feel like if something was going on there, my concern is that the homeless population that's being dismissed as alcoholics or drug addicts or people with mental health issues, that if they went missing, I don't think, it wouldn't raise those red flags. If a prostitute or a homeless person, if they die, or somebody who's threatened self-harm or idealization of self-harm or mental health issues, as we saw with Lisa Lam, if something happens to them, you can basically get away with murder, and I think that's what happened here with Lisa Lam. Because, as I said, 1967, California redefined who was supposed to be indefinitely for indefinite periods of time in these mental hospitals. Okay. And then we saw the connection between mental hospitals and American Horror Story, both with Joseph Mengele and the asylum and with Jim Jones and the cults. And then we also saw it last year, 1984, with Richard Ramirez. He made an appearance along with the Zodiac Killer and other serial killers in Hotel season 5, but then that also was last year, which was really crappy season of American Horror Story, which is about Richard Ramirez in 1984. So they put up barriers and broke off these parameters to contain the homeless population. so they can't leave, and it's completely lawless. It's anarchy, bedlam, chaos. You're allowed to do whatever you want, basically. Drugs, prostitution. There's violence. So you sort of have this very lawless Wild West next to tourist in Los Angeles. And so I wanted to also talk about serial killers because we have two. There's a very dark history. Officially, according, and I'll talk about in the next part, there are only officially listed 16 deaths that were murder or by taking their own life or even an OD. But Amy Price, the manager at the time of Hotel Cecil that appears in the Netflix special, she says that 80 people have died on her watch. So I'm assuming they died of natural causes because there's a lot of elderly long-term residents. But I really don't take her word for it. Like, how do I know these other 80 people died of natural causes? And that's why I had to call a coroner. So, and she doesn't really discuss that a lot of people had died there, but it was not, because she says 80, but officially it's only 16 over the last 100 years. It has a very dark history. And so in 1985 is when we had Richard Ramirez, The Night Stalker. And there's also Netflix, a series on that, and I watched it. He's, of course, a very prolific Satanist. Now, reading David McGowan's book over Programmed to Kill, The Politics of a Serial Killer, it talks about serial killers, and his stories are a little bit different. He had 2 brain injuries, as I remember correctly, and then he went to stay with his uncle, who showed him photos of what he was doing to people in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and that he was just sort of brutally torturing civilians. And he had those photos, and he would tell Richard Ramirez those stories, and then he ended up murdering his wife. And Richard ended up going to live with him. This is in El Paso. Now, there's other serial killers, just like Dahmer and Berkowitz and Mark David Chapman, and mass shooters like Oswald. There's Timothy McVeigh that was discussed, Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, Charles Whitman. There's other serial killers and mass shooters who have military backgrounds. And that's what 2/3 of the book is about. And Programmed to Kill. And there's different reasons why they're serial killers or mass shooters. Some of them were super soldiers, and what they were doing, like the Boston Strangler, DeSalvo, he would go in ahead of the military, and he would terrorize people in Vietnam. And he would create this like psychological warfare just by brutally terrorizing, like death squad, terrorizing like bayonets and babies. That's what he was doing. And when he got back to the United States, he had no way of controlling that. So so that was going on. I think there are people like Henry Lee Lucas, who was previously in an institution, and he was in an institution for murder. But while he was in there, he believes something happened, like MK Ultra, because then he couldn't control his urges to keep killing. He was a procurer, so he was rounding up like women and children for whatever reason, sacrifice and sex trafficking, organ harvest. After NAFTA was passed, because both Bush 1 and Bill Clinton supported NAFTA, Ross Perot here in Texas did not, because it's going to send our jobs across the border, and it would forever change the nature of border towns, and also led to the death of over 5,000 maquiladora workers who are women. There were multiple serial killers and multiple R-wordist working in our border towns. And that was all covered up by both the U.S. government and Texas and the Mexican government, because it wasn't good for business. And then Henry Lee Lucas was eventually caught, and he was in a Texas jail. And when Bush II was governor, we had like a death row. That was every 2 weeks somebody was in the electric chair or the needle. Except Henry Lee Lucas. He was allowed to die of natural causes. That is the only person, a serial killer, because he was working for them, for a ritual sacrifice and procuring traffic victims. That was the only person that Governor Bush spared, was Henry Lee Lucas, and that's because him and someone else was working for them in Texas, along the borders. You also have super soldiers. You have what looks like random killings, but are also targeted. Berkowitz he was tied into a cult, and so he was just a low-level person that had to take the fall. Oswald was supposed to take those 3 shots and miss as part of a psychological warfare to blame Cuba and the reasons to invade Cuba. But he was a patsy to let it. And that was also the same thing that happened with Timothy McVeigh, who was also ex-military. Because he wasn't really ex; they were still working for the military. And Charles Whitman was in Austin. He was at the clock tower. Which also brings us to Christopher Dorner. And that was mentioned in I like what they included, like these details. Christopher Dorner, I'm saying his name correctly, he was an LAPD police officer, and he was fired for excessive force. He was previously a Navy reservist. He killed 4, wounded 3, went after LAPD officers and a family member. And then while they were in pursuit of Dorner, they accidentally shot 3 civilians and were never held accountable. I've heard about that case. I don't know where I was probably busy teaching. I don't really remember specifically, but I thought it was interesting that they brought in someone who had a military background and a police background, and they were in pursuit of the man, and that's why they couldn't do their job. And that was their excuse. That they blamed the manhunt on why they didn't inspect the water tanks. I don't think that was an accident that was their excuse. Then we have, this is also discussed in both the Netflix and the Ghost Adventures. We have John Underweger. Now, despite being a convicted murderer and working as a pimp, and that he is an R-wordist, he, in Austria, he was a serial killer who was linked to being murdered several different people, and he was working in Austria, West Germany, Czechoslovakia, and then later in the U.S. But he was only convicted of 1 murder, and that was in 1974. Although it was presumed that he had others, but he did end up serving time for that one. The literary elite of Austria believed that he was rehabilitated because he was he was a playwright, and they loved his work. And so they assumed, well, if he's writing all these plays and he's, he must be rehabilitated. So he's able to get out of prison, and after he's released, women in his vicinity start going missing again. near his home, and so the police in Austria began investigating the deaths, and that's when he decides to go to LA. And when he shows up in LA, he's a convicted murderer, a pimp, and an R-wordist. And the LAPD gives him a tour of the Netflix, they call it the Hostro, but where all the prostitutes work, and they help him learn about the ins and outs of LA's pimp and prostitutes. And it's funny because, not funny, but ironically, or I don't know, if you go, can't make this up, if you Google, it's not like a hidden secret, if you Google what an LA sheriff's badge looks like, it has a series of triangles, and those triangles are also on my page's banner, because I guess dating back to the 80s, maybe the 70s, the North American Boy Lovers or Boy Lovers, or any of those groups, they used either a spiral or they used a series of like kind of a maze of triangles or triangles within triangles, and that's what's on a LA Sheriff's badge. So they put it right up there front, so everybody knows that's what they're covering. And so I'm wondering, like, was he working for them? Because I mean, was he the pimp? And did he work for this literary elite that got him out of prison? Was he working with the LAPD? And once the deaths ended in Austria, they started back again, but in LA, once he arrived in LA. So he killed 9. There are more murders, and he brought, so he was bringing up prostitutes to his room, and he wanted to stay in the same room as Richard Ramirez, another famous serial killer who was in prison at the time, and he ended up dying of cancer. So he wasn't in prison for very long when he wasn't sentenced to death. So he brought prostitutes back to his room, claiming he was working as a journalist and was researching this topic. After he was caught, he was extradited back to Austria, and it was a life sentence, and he ended up hanging himself in 1994. And I was like, is that like Jeffrey Epstein? Was he kind of blow the whistle? Did he have connections? Was he like a low-level procurer or pimp? So that was curious. And it's 1402 because there's no 13th floor. So like hotels that were built before the 1970s, a lot of them don't have 13 floors because of fear and superstition. Now, 3, because of the Holy Trinity. 13, I'm going to tell you why. And 33, I don't know that, and I think 33 is because of the parallel line. These are all, so 3, 13, 33 are all significant to Freemasons and Illuminati and the occult. The original Friday the 13th, and why it's considered unlucky, dates back to October 13, 1307, when King Philip the Fourth of France arrested 100 Knights of Templar, and after they served in the Crusades, and there was that split between them, and of course that's the story of the Bram Stoker's Dracula and the Order of the Dragon. So that's the Knights Templar. So I also want to talk about Elisa Lam and the Korean elevator game Ritual. I also noticed that one thing, Amy Price, the hotel manager, said, well, one time we found a snake in one of the bathtubs, and I'm like, that's funny. Snake? Why is she telling me about the snake? Is that something with the occult? But when Lisa Lam went missing was right around that year. She went missing on February the 1st, and February the 10th was Chinese New Year, and it was the year of the snake. But that probably just coincidence. So the police arrested this elevator footage, and it went viral. It reminded me a lot of like found footage, these ghost stories. Like, remember back in 1999 when everybody watched the shaky camera of the Blair Witch Project, and you had people seeing a ghost story in found footage or like paranormal activity. So when this footage is released, and it's roughly 4 minutes minus 53 seconds, the LAP put that out there. They put it out there because they wanted help on the case, but they also wanted to criticize everybody that had tried to help them, as we see in the Netflix special, and that was on Reddit, and that's what when I pull, like, I just saw a article from of all places, I think American Bar Association, about discrediting internet sleuths and how they all got it wrong. So there's also a discrepancy, because the LAPD is like, well, that's what we got. That was missing. Like, they're like, I don't know. They claim that if it's missing 53 seconds and there's a busted time code, then it's the hotel, Amy Price, something on the chain of command, some kind of breakdown. But Amy Price and the manager is like, well, we gave them the original footage. I need a haircut. We gave them the original footage, so if there's a missing 15 if there's missing 15 there's missing 53 seconds, it is not because we did something wrong. It is because the LAPD edited the original video, and they removed something that was too sensitive, and they chose not to release the full tape. So the hotel, being very corporate, which Amy Price claims that she's corporate, that she's this is like a corporation for her, as well as her kingdom in a zoo. She claims that they gave her that they turned over the full tape, and the police claim that they received an edited version, and that's what they got. So there's and so the documentary on Netflix really doesn't address either of those things. Who's telling the truth about the missing 53 seconds and why the video is edited with the busted time code, that there's something missing, and if it's what that was given to the LAPD like that, or was it edited originally by Amy Price in the hotel. So they asked for people's help, and they claimed they omitted key information and they said, well, the reason why we wanted your help, but the reason why you internet sleuths and conspiracy theorists, which is a CIA term, and Reddit users and YouTubers and bloggers, you got it wrong because you didn't have all of the information, because we intentionally omitted key information about this case. But we needed your help anyways. And that's the primary purpose for this documentary. Joe Berlinger, his purpose was to discredit people on the internet coming together, working together organically, like a grassroots effort to solve a case. Refusing, using critical thinking skills, refusing to believe what the LAPD told us, refusing to believe what the media told us, or the corporation that we decided to get together and work on this and come up with our own theories as to what we think happened. And that's his primary purpose. And right before I went live, they even popped up. I guess it triggered an algorithm, and it said, discrediting internet sleuths, how we all got it wrong. I don't think we all got it wrong. I don't think that's what happened. And I went to Reddit after I watched all these sources. I did a quick search of Reddit, and almost every post, all the recent posts, I can go back and keep looking, but all of the recent posts now, thanks to the Netflix special, is all about how we're sorry, we screwed up, we got it wrong. It was a mental health issue. It was an accidental drowning. We all owe an apology to Morbid, aka Pablo Vergara. which I'm going to address in the next video. And that's no. So, Hollywood makes these videos, they make movies, and Netflix is even worse about making things in order to get ahead of the narrative. They knew what they were doing was wrong, and they didn't want people researching it any further than the Cecil Hotel, one girl's death, because I think there were other deaths. And I think there are other Cecil hotels with this Masonic, occult, Illuminati connections to Aleister Crowley and things of that nature. I don't think this was like a one-off. But I'll talk about Morbid and Satanic Panic again, and Amy Price in the next part, as I'm finishing up this one. So we're seeing this viral video, and this inspired Ryan Murphy of FX, American Horror Story, Hotel Season 5. And so in the first episode of that series, Season 5, we see 2 European backpackers. They're wanting to stay in a hostel, a youth hostel, and kind of like, I guess it's kind of like a scary movie, Eli Roth's Youth Hostel. He said that he was always, right, and then we see that they die and then they're trapped in the hotel. But Ryan Murphy said that he was always fascinated by the Cecil Hotel. But he also based it on the Murder Castle, which is a hotel by H.H. Holmes, and that's in Chicago, and that was built around the time of the Chicago World Fair. LAPD didn't release other footage. They said there was no cameras on the 5th floor. They said some cameras weren't in a great position, so they couldn't really see anything. I think they have a camera of the 2 men who delivered her the box from the last bookstore, and I'll talk about that, the last bookstore, in the next, in part 2. So the police even tried to blame it on drugs. They tried to blame it on schizophrenic hallucinations. They say that she takes medication, and then they say, well, she doesn't take medication. So it's kind of a catch-22 for people who take medications. As far as her reactions to her meds. Now, according to Ghost Adventure, Lamb was playing the South Korean elevator game of conjuring a spirit. And if you do this ritual correctly, you'll be able to travel between 2 spiritual dimensions or worlds. And it's like you have to have it has to be a hotel with 10 floors, and you have to put in a series of buttons. And the people on Ghost Adventures, this guy's named Aaron, he performed that series, that ritual, and he did experience a female ghost, a woman. She enters, I guess that stops on the 5th floor, and then a woman, when the elevator doors open, a woman steps on, the ghost, and you're not allowed to acknowledge her or speak to her or look at her. And there's a limited amount of time that you have to operate between those 2 worlds and to possibly contact a dead loved one. I think if you do it wrong, you may die there prematurely, as well as being stuck in limbo. And I did research that on YouTube, and I talked to, there's people who, and people have talked about it, I think on Reddit as well, independently of Elisa Lamb. That it's just like this, like Bloody Mary, say it in the mirror 3 times, kind of challenge or dare that kids are playing. And I don't know if everyone knows the exact, because most people who put it on the internet did not put out the exact number series. So they didn't want people to copycat, and because so allegedly, if you're reading about the elevator game, you may not have the full instructions. So it's kind of a dare among kids, an urban legend, but Ghost Adventures says that's what she was doing in the video. You see her, she's interacting or engaging with something that's not there, it's not invisible to the naked eye. And some people, Jay Myers does these really great videos, as far as being like, conspiracy theorist. He talks about cloaking technology, and it ties in some other information about that. But you see her interacting, and then when she steps out, she sidesteps around something. Or she believes there's something there. And it looks very weird. It's also part because it's been slowed down. So it's moving, so we're seeing it in slow-mo. That's pretty much conclude this. I really do not like Netflix. I would much rather see a 4-part series that was done that well, like by Ghost Adventures. That wasn't the purpose of doing that series. I feel like when I saw it, I don't have bipolar. I have depression, and I know people who have bipolar, and I've never seen any of them take off all their clothes, go to the top of a hotel, climb in a water tank, throw their clothes in, and then drown facing upright. I've never heard of that story. Like I don't know anybody that's ever had a manic episode that's done that. I kind of felt like it was like hysteria, and it was about when early gynecology started giving women hysterectomies if they were misbehaving, and if they were acting out or being sexually promiscuous. And so I kind of felt like to say, oh, she, because most people wouldn't have drowned themselves. If they wanted to take their own life, they wouldn't have done that. She had pills she could have used. She could have jumped from the roof like other people who took their life. So it was very weird, and there's a lot there. And so I just really don't think that she would have taken her life or drowned by accident. It's too much of a strange story, and it's not coincidences. It's what was that word? Synchronicities. So I just really have a problem with Netflix saying, and then I went on Reddit and they said the same thing. Oh, well, she was mentally ill and she had bipolar. She was taking medicine, or she wasn't taking it, or she wasn't taking enough of it. It took 4 months for the coroner to come up with, and they rolled it accidental, and they cited her being bipolar, and that was on her death certificate. And there's talk that it was changed from taking her own life to an accident. There's a 3-day discrepancy on that, but there's no trauma to the body, according to the coroner. There was no drugs in her system. They only said that she was taking her meds, and that she might not have been taking them properly, medication that was in her system. But no, I think foul play. So I think there's a lot more to it. On the Ghost Adventures, they think that, well, Netflix even said this is where serial killers go to let their hair down. This is a known place for serial killers, and we only know about 2 of them, Richard Ramirez and Jack Undergardner. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he, for some reason, was in Austria, and he knew to come over here to the Cecil Hotel. So, and then we see in American Horror Story season 5 that they have Devil's Night, and this is where past and former serial killers meet to worship Satan. So it made it, Ghost Adventures made it seem like that because Richard Ramirez would go out and He was like torturing and murdering and R-wording and children and doing all these horrible things. And then he would come back to the Cecil and he would take off his bloody clothes, not because he wasn't trying to hide the evidence, because he left plenty of evidence to track him at these places. He wanted to be caught eventually. But he would throw off these like bloody soiled clothes and walk around bloody and just in his underwear throughout the hotel. And so Ghost Adventures thinks that he was performing, sort of alluded to him performing satanic rituals on top of the roof and possibly putting some kind of like demonic spell on the water, like on that water tank where she was found. There was also graffiti, and I saw it, and I went back and I watched the Netflix 3 times. And the last time I watched it, I did see the graffiti that said that, she was a C-U-N-T in Latin. That the tank near where her body was found called her C-U-N-T. And that's also graffiti that was next to it in the previous year. So maybe that was a yearly sacrifice, except this time they sacrificed someone who had a family and loved ones. I'm also curious about why she didn't have a phone, because she called in every day up until January 31st, and the day she was supposed to check out. If she didn't call it, the day she was supposed to check out, she also didn't call her parents. And most millennials, that's how old she would have been, 21, they take their cell phones everywhere. Just so for her, they never recovered a cell phone. And I think that was something that was brought up in Reddit, because a cell phone you could track, it pings off of towers. So people believe that maybe her cell phone was missing, or she lost it, or it was stolen. Because I don't think that was ever found, because they never released any reports that they checked the cell towers. So next time it's going to be about Amy Price and a doppelganger that looks just like her, a politician in Vermont, and who saw that she posted photos where she met President Biden. I'll talk about Satanic Panic and Morbid. I think he was a decoy, patsy. That was all a misdirection or a distraction from the real people, because he was very overt with Satanism, and the people that we're looking for are hide in plain sight. And then I'll also come back in the third part. We'll talk about Dark Water and its connections to Roman Polanski, Rosemary's Baby. So that was a lot of information about Elisa Lam and the Cecil Hotel. And I'm making this video, I don't know if anybody will see it, but I'm making it not because I expect justice for Elisa Lam, not that she doesn't deserve it, but because the people that I'm talking about are too big to jail. And I don't want anyone to harass anyone and go ask anyone about this, because I don't know if that's the solution either. I think just being aware and knowing what's going on and being woke or red pilled or whatever, or enlightened or whatever, was a good start. But I think it would help people make sense of this. I'm not sure if anybody on Reddit wants to hear my theories after they only watch Netflix. That was my take. So, logging off.